Welcome to the 10th and final episode of this season of Using AI. Today we'll be covering an industry which often comes top of the list of industries to be disrupted by ML and AI innovation, law and the legal industry as a whole. I'm your host, Alex Denne, and I'm joined once more by ML research scientist Alex Papadopoulos Korfiatis and AI startup founder Rafie Faruq. Welcome both.
I say, Alex, I think you've gotten a lot better at saying my name out loud. Like, it's so fluent now. Like,
the truth is, I don't write it because I'm always worried about where the O's and the U's go.
Yeah, wouldn't blame you. Yeah, I've had all possible different misspellings of my name, I think, on official documents and everything. So
I'm sure.
well done on the pronunciation.
How do you even have the space in the last name field in documents that you have to fill out?
I don't. That's the problem, especially with airlines. That's a huge problem. I've had it bite me before where I don't know where they cut it off. I cannot sign in. I have issues with checking in. Anyway.
Have you worked out how many possible permutations of spellings of your last name is possible with just the vowels?
Maybe I should. Maybe I should. I think I've seen all of them though by now.
Yeah. I just I'll go on a real tangent here just as we're beginning, but
I don't think it's a tangent if we haven't started in a direction yet. I think you're just setting the direction for the whole podcast. So I'm very interested to know where this goes for the episode.
Well, I was just curious because number of possible combinations, I guess, would be the number of letters factorial. But then if you constrain the consonants and only vary the vowels, then that would be quite an interesting math problem as the number of combinations or even permutations.
Could AI even do the maths problem for you? You wouldn't even have to worry about it. You just, we give Alex's name to GPT-4 and we say, list all of the possible ways that a sensible person could misspell this name.
Okay, now I'm going to go try that after the episode.
Right. So as usual, you can actually watch these episodes on YouTube now. There's a link to the YouTube channel in the show notes. But let's dive into news from this week. I think the first one that's quite interesting is OpenAI basically saying we're going to create an app store for AI models. What do you guys think of this when you saw it?
I mean, it certainly seems to be the direction that they're going towards. They already have sort of an app store just for free things with their OpenAI plugins. But now they'll allow models as well and developers to charge for them, which is pretty cool. I think positioning themselves as a one-stop shop for anything AI related, and it's kind of working until now. So they're trying to keep that going, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting. I heard from a source, which I cannot confirm nor deny, that Microsoft have trained, for example, smaller models just for their developers to use for coding and code completion. So small models for particular tasks, kind of going back to how ML used to be. So yeah, you can kind of see different models for different personalities and different tasks being available that are faster and easier to run.
There are also, remember discussing open roles with some really interesting companies prior to my days at Genie, where there are these fascinating companies that are, I guess this sort of predates the AI hype, where they would provide you with high quality data. So like data ports. And so they would create like this data ocean, and the metaphor is that you like bring your ship, your model, your feature, whatever, into port where you can dock against this data set. And the valuations they were looking at and the sort of enterprise clients fees they were commanding were colossal. So I think there's a huge enterprise market as well for formalizing and structuring an app store, because I think OpenAI are also really trying to land enterprise clients. I know, where did I hear about this? I think Goldman Sachs were onboarding or really wanted to onboard a tool, but it used a little bit of OpenAI or GPT-4, but they were already onboarding GPT-4 and OpenAI as a product. Rafie is smiling, so I think he actually knows where I've heard of this, and I now realize where I've heard of it as well.
Yeah, no, you're right. Just to add to that, we spoke to Citibank this week, and they're trying to onboard their private instance of OpenAI. And I also spoke to a large family office investor, the name of which I cannot confirm nor deny, which are also onboarding a private instance of OpenAI. So it seems like you're right. There's a big push for large enterprise customers.
And I suppose for an enterprise, if you have onboarded OpenAI, then it's not so much a leap to say, okay, well, this Llama model by Meta wants to commercialize their open source models. That's some of the news coming out this week. You can maybe access that through OpenAI, and it just removes some of the red tape for enterprises.
Yeah, it will be interesting if big companies that provide these LLMs would provide the models through any OpenAI kind of marketplace or app store, because they might just not want to do that as well.
Yeah, it's super interesting. One to keep an eye on how the app store lands and whether they can pull off the Amazon-style aggregator platform for AI models. Second piece of news is turns out that China now has an underground market for sort of import banned or export from the US banned NVIDIA A100 AI chips. They are going on what people are calling the black market for AI chips in China for about $20,000 a chip. These are the best chips in the world at the moment. I'm now getting hungry just talking about chips. And they're usually about $10,000 before the bulk order discount. So it looks like on this sort of sneaking them into China and providing them to startups who want to train their own AI models. You're paying 100% premium for sneaking chips into China.
The real question is, how do you like your chips?
Not marked up double the price, probably.
Yeah, with a pinch of salt. Now, the other interesting part of this news is that, and I don't quite understand how these two work together, right? This confuses me. But ByteDance, who own TikTok, have committed to 1 billion in orders for these chips from NVIDIA, presumably at less than $10,000, because that's quite the bulk order. But if you're not allowed to export them to China, but TikTok's allowed to buy a billion's worth, it feels like, NVIDIA have got a clever little way to make extra money there.
I don't know. I think I'm going to reserve comments on this one. A lot of these articles as well, they're kind of trying to put down China, aren't they, in a subtle, implicit way. So I find it hard to know how much is real and how much is subtle propaganda.
That is deep. I have no comment on that. Moving on to the last piece of news before we move on to the theme. Except we have some exciting stuff from Rafie as well, is that SoftBank, an absolutely massive entity in terms of investment vehicle. I don't know if you could even call them a VC firm because they're just so massive. Famously, they lost hundreds of millions on, probably actually tens of billions on WeWork. I don't even know what the numbers are. SoftBank numbers are always ridiculous numbers. But they have been supposedly in defense with this sort of reduction in the valuations of lots of large companies that they invested in and that have either flopped, or had trouble, or just have had down rounds or whatever. They're moving into offense mode. So SoftBank's investment winter is over, and the AI hype is bringing them into an investment summer. So more news about AI hype and investment, which is always lovely to see.
Yeah, always the SoftBank story is always a little bit funny, isn't it? Have you seen the massive sums of money they pump out and invest, and then everything apparently crashing afterwards?
Yeah, you almost don't want SoftBank to invest in you at the moment. This is probably just like SoftBank trying to get positive PR for themselves.
Yeah, I actually spoke to an investor at SoftBank a year or two ago. Smart enough guys, but yeah, very different to your average investor, shall we say.
Would you say, I know very little about this, but would you say that they have a similar approach to something like a sovereign wealth fund because of the amount of assets that they're looking to allocate? As in, they just have so much cash sloshing around that is the due diligence just weaker? Like, how does it feel when you're speaking to an entity as big as SoftBank?
Yeah, it's hard for me to make a complete and accurate judgment. But I just spoke to one person who's fairly senior, but just one person, and he was a nice chap, fairly rigorous, perhaps even impatient, which is typical of investors, I suppose. So I don't really have any in-depth comment to make because it's hard to judge from that one person. But I have the same questions as you, as much as I can say, to be honest.
Fair. All right. Well, that concludes the little news segment for this episode. And Rafie, we're throwing in a special segment for you because you went to a pretty cool event at the House of Lords or UK Parliament this week on, what was that about?
Yeah, so actually a listener of our podcast, an old friend of mine, Rob Allen, works for an awesome think tank called Policy Connect. And they're a cross-parliamentary think tank that advises these all-parliamentary groups, which are cross-parliamentary groups that have special interests in certain areas of policy. And so this particular group is about, I believe it was AI and ethics or AI and data, one of those. And I came along. There were one MP there and a couple of lords and a bunch of political people. And they talked about a report created by Policy Connect about AI regulation, which had some recommendations. Some of those recommendations included things like create policies that are internationally collaborative, so that companies are operating under some sort of internationally consistent law. And others were things like they want to create an AI ethics center in the UK. But whilst I think it is really awesome work by Policy Connect to bring everything together and create this event, I did wonder if the recommendations were just a bit vague and a bit like high level. I didn't see much specific coming out of that. And the question that I raised to the audience and to the MP and the Lords was that, what specifically are we trying to solve here? It seems like everyone's kind of like, hey, let's have AI regulation because this whole thing that Sam Altman said means we now need AI regulation. So that being the solution, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And I suggested that nothing new is becoming illegal. Everything that was illegal before is still illegal. The copyright is still copyright. Creating a weapon is still illegal, whether you use ChatGPT or do it yourself. So this seems to be a problem of degree, because large language models help you do everything better, faster, rather than of type, because nothing new is legal or illegal. At least that should be the default position. So I mentioned that, but the panel didn't really agree, but I felt like their reasons were not good because they had no reasons, because there were unfortunately no technical people on the panel. It's kind of consultants at EY and things like that, which I was a bit disappointed in, if I'm honest with you. But it was a good event, and yeah, thanks to Policy Connect, especially Rob and everyone who's there to make this discussion public, given the importance.
Sounds like a very good summary and a good event, and it's always fun to go to those sorts of things. It's fascinating to me how often I've heard the problem described as not enough technical people involved in the reports, the suggestions for what we should do with policy and regulation and various things. Like, I guess that's a whole other kettle of fish, but yeah, we should just have more technical people involved in those areas, or better mechanisms to involve technical people in the private sector in those recommendations.
Yeah, it's like AI policy and AI regulation policy. You need a social scientist, and you need someone who understands the models, a technical person, and then you probably want a citizen panel as well to know how it really affects the people, ordinary people. But you need those three. Like, one can't survive without the other.
Absolutely. Moving on to the theme of the week then, which also relies on experts and what we know so far from experts using AI, is the legal context of using AI tools. Full disclaimer, we all work for a legal tech company, Genie AI, and we feel like we know a thing or two about the industry and the market and the problems that people are solving. So forgive us if we accidentally get a little bit too technical at any time. We'll try and keep it broad. We won't just talk about us, because there are lots of great companies out there. So ones that we may mention, in various ways that many of our listeners might have heard of, especially if they have an interest in legal technology and legal AI, are ThoughtRiver, Lexico, LawGeex, LexisNexis are working on AI products, Donna, SpellBook, Ironclad, Zegal, and Harvey, to just name a few. There are, many more, and Genie AI, obviously. But I'm curious to sort of pose the question to Alex and Rafie, in what contexts, since ChatGPT was released in November last year, in what contexts we've seen people using it or other AI tools legally. What sort of use cases have you come across, and good or bad?
I think the most obvious use case would be to draft contracts, right? So people go on ChatGPT and tell it that's what they want to do. Please draft a contract for me. So text generation.
Yeah, what's the reason that they would go to an AI rather than the established routes of solving that problem, right? If I need a contract drafted, whether it's residential, whether it's family, whether it's commercial, whether it's, real estate, copyright, IP, could even be court documents, right? Like, there are lots and lots of different sort of legal documents that are the foundations of society, the foundation of business deals. What's making me go, I'm going to try AI for this?
You get personalization, which you don't get with, for example, a contract template that you just get off the internet, right? What do you think, Rafie? You've worked in this field for a while. Why do people try to generate contracts with AI?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're right. And there's like a high level obvious reason, which is simply the cost, I suppose. Everyone does everything they can to not pay £5,000 to a lawyer, and wait 2 weeks to get a result. But on a more detailed level, you're right. The AI can give you more than just a template. And there's also the factor of trust, which we all know from our experiences, one of the key issues that users face when using a legal tech platform. Because with a law firm, you get that trust of the quality. And you need trust because there's no quantitative, clear way to determine quality. Which, as a side note, is why lawyers thrive. So the question for these platforms is, and using AI, is what gives the user trust in the quality of the result. And that's where things get really interesting.
And that's not even specifically contract drafting, right? Trust pervades all of the different legal use cases of AI tools. And I think we humans ascribe a lot of trust to the people that we work with. And if you've had a lawyer who's got you out of a bind or helped you with something in the past, you're definitely going to have a sense of trust. You can trust them with confidential information. Nothing happened when you revealed it to them first time. You can trust them with documents. You can trust them with, personal issues, whatever it is. And you trust that they'll be able to help you get what you need done. And I think there are various things within that are a little bit harder to attach to using a legal tech platform. As you say, like you can trust the lawyer because they've passed exams, they're qualified, they're practicing, it's their day-to-day job. But we have emergent capabilities of very general large language models that people have been using for specialized legal tasks, and how they can perceive trust, I think, is quite. I think that there are a lot of people that trust ChatGPT probably more than they should. For example, and we don't even have to mention it really, but the chap who got ChatGPT to come up with some example case references for a court case, and ChatGPT had just made them up, right? And he hadn't even thought to check. So hallucination we know is an issue. But this goes beyond hallucination, right? Talking about legal tech platforms and trust. So what other elements are there, would you say? And would you say contract drafting is where trust applies the most?
I think there are a whole range of, as the industry likes to call it, use cases. I'm not a big fan of the word use case because it usually implies that you built a solution without considering the problem. Because you would know the use case if you. Anyway, I'm just going on the product rant. So what are the use cases or areas where legal AI can be used? So you could think of it in terms of, you have the transactional side, which is legal transactions that often involve contracts. Or you could think of it about in terms of the dispute side, which is a different type of law. And in that case, there's a whole range of legal AI that basically sifts through thousands and thousands of documents during a dispute and identifies problematic areas or areas of interest. There's a name for that area. It's escaping me just now, but it's quite a common, well-known name. So you have transactions, disputes, litigation, and then there's maybe consumer as another high-level area. It's a company like DoNotPay, which is a really cool company based in the US for consumers not to pay lawyers. So these are maybe three of the really top level broad categories, and then within that there's many other categories like drafting, reviewing documents, and so on.
So it's almost like the legal sectors, and then there's the different jobs to be done of a person currently transacting within one of those sectors. It makes sense to almost think of it crudely as a recently qualified junior lawyer, paralegal, legal intern, who has been given a data-heavy, time-consuming task to do. That lends itself very well to the capabilities of AI. Is that fair?
Yeah, I'd be curious also of Alex perhaps views on this, because in the past the thought was that the best use case for AI was cases when there's lots of troves of data and you're sifting through and trying to get insights out of it. For example, as a paralegal would for a large M&A deal. But nowadays, it seems like the scope of AI is just even day-to-day work. So I wonder, yeah, Alex, what your thoughts are on that.
I have the impression that it's two different things. AI models, maybe not generative AI models or large language models, will still be great and needed for exploration work and to sift through large amounts of data. This is something that humans actually cannot do, or cannot do within a reasonable time frame. So we will need machines to do that for us, and hopefully those kinds of systems will get better and better. But the current LLMs do not do that, right? So one of the main weaknesses is that they cannot really go through like the context window size that the data that we can fit into a large language model are limited. So we need to come up with other techniques to feed more data into them. And those are the ones, these kinds of models are the ones that are replacing day-to-day work as well. So very different capabilities. Combining the two is what people are trying to do, and it's a cool way out of this, right? But yet, to add to your pretty cool description, Alex, of the legal intern that's given like a very data-specific task, the other problem that the language models are lacking, except for experience and context, is the ability to focus on very long documents, right? They can only focus and really excel on a short passage of the document. Now we're seeing increasingly more models that don't have that problem, like Anthropic's Claude with the 100K context window, or the new GPT-4 32K context window models, but it's still unproven how much the models can attend to those long contexts. Whereas as humans, we have other strategies to deal with it, right? So we go through passages, we make a mental map in our mind. Maybe this is something that the models will need to be doing as well. Sorry, I went on a bit of a tangent here, but I do think it's two different sets of capabilities: the large language models and other kind of data-heavy machine learning.
It's interesting in those. I'm trying to think back to, when you have a conversation with someone who's technical and they talk to you about the systems and the machines, and you talk to a user of it and they just want it to work, and combining those two tools at the back end provide something that is most likely to work. And if it works, people will trust it. It's probably as simple as that. But with legal contracts, you don't really know whether something works until it gets tested, which I think is one of the issues. Obviously, in something that's a lot faster turnaround, like a dispute or an arbitration or something like that, you're getting instant feedback from the other party and it's looping back. But in a business transaction, once it's signed, that contract might not get tested until one party wants to terminate, or until there's another issue or a dispute or a change, innovation, or something that needs to be made to it, or an additional party, or another that business you transacted with gets purchased by another business and it doesn't align with their terms and it needs to be rewritten, and people have different expectations. So I suppose that's true with a lawyer as well, right? Like not knowing the quality of the work that they've done, but through the process of paying a very high fee, I think people get a sense that they must have bought something that's quality. Do you think the low fees that might be associated, or like the greater affordability of AI versus lawyer fees is going to cause issues with the trust element?
Yes, it's really interesting actually, because the root problem is that how do you judge quality? And if people can't judge the quality of a thing, they use heuristics. And so people generally can't judge legal quality unless you're a lawyer or you have legal experience. By the way, it's not that hard. There is like a 7-point checklist you could create to judge the quality of a legal document. But that said, if you don't know that checklist, then people use things like, how good is the formatting of a document, which we were talking about earlier today? Are the headings bolded? Are the definitions in the right place? Does it have a table of contents? And as you said, the price. So it's a very interesting question. As the price of legal drops, will people still trust it as much? That's a psychological question as much as a product one.
A tiny side note on that is how interesting it's been with the customer research we've done, because we provide a free open source clause library, and we provide nearly 5,000 open source templates. If we say free to the user, the perception of quality is low. But what we really care about doing is creating something that is community driven and open source. And if you say that everyone's like, well, oh yeah, that sounds great. And it's just the psychology of language. But free has been abused by people for so long that something that's free can't possibly be any good, right? You get what you pay for, right?
Yeah, and economics, I think you might know this, Alex, but isn't it a given good where as the price goes up, demand goes up? It's quite interesting.
Yeah, and there are actually use cases of jewelry shops doubling prices and then the demand doubles, because before people just thought the jewelry wasn't good quality.
Yeah, the two interesting cases are luxury goods, and then there's another case of I believe in Ireland they found that during the potato famine, as the price of bread increased, people bought more bread because their ability to buy other foods decreased. So they had to fall back to the kind of base food. So that's quite interesting.
Are you saying that we should charge £1,000 or $1,000 for every template and do that as an A/B test?
Well, how about anyone listening to this podcast comment on our LinkedIn or Twitter and tell us if you want us to charge £1,000 more.
Yeah, we'll put that poll out, so you can all have a say, and we may or may not listen. We will probably just start charging you thousands, and then have money fights. I think that's how it works.
It would be really interesting to see, going back to your previous point, Alex, about the contracts not really being tested until there's a dispute and they end up in a court of law. It would be interesting to see what matters more for people's trust, like the previous track record of a lawyer or the fees that they charge. And does that actually change if a document was not drafted well enough and then it loses in court because of that? Would people lose trust in that firm? Or if they do, and well, either way, it could be that the future of AI contract drafting and similar AI legal assistance tools will also depend on things like that, right? Maybe at some point in a couple of years, there's a high profile legal case where one of the parties loses because the document was AI drafted, right? And that will just collapse trust in AI legal assistance. Or the other way around, and then people will trust AI legal assistance more than lawyers.
I do think that, there's a couple of things there. So the first is, I do think that piece of news is coming in the next 12 months. Someone who's used an AI generated contract and the contract gets destroyed in a dispute for whatever reason. It didn't have the nuance, it wasn't personalized, it was the wrong governing law. It was someone who maybe it was careless usage, maybe it was the model we're talking GPT-3 rather than GPT-4. We know that GPT-4 is in the top 10% of graduates of the bar, but we know GPT-3 was only in the bottom 10%. So, there's also been massive model improvements, and that probably won't come out in the news article about which. They'll just say ChatGPT, of course, and hit the headlines. But the other thing in terms of trust, the thing that I feel hasn't been done yet, and I'm fascinated to see, and I know it's something that we like the idea of, is draft me a contract that only uses wording that has been tested in courts of law. And I know that there's other ways of saying that, but that's me as a potential user. I think the other way of saying it is draft me a contract and reference the cases that each clause relates to, or protects me against, or protects the other party against. But there's public filings of massive corporations doing deals, and not everyone wants a really bloated contract, but it does feel like you can access and get similar wording to protect yourself as a small business, because there's obviously a lot of fear of legal costs if you're challenged, or if there's a dispute and you're a small business, that can really destroy your livelihood.
Yeah, well said. It has to be said also that contracts drafted by lawyers get, to use the word, destroyed in court all the time, every day, in fact. So, contracts drafted by AI absolutely will get, will go down badly in court. Many of them will, thousands, millions of them will, because the reality is soon everything's going to be AI drafted, or AI assistant drafted, AI assisted, I should say. So that's just the future. Sadly or not, all content will have some AI components for the most part, and that will go through the normal legal and institutional systems of society.
So if we, just to wrap up contract drafting, we did find a few links actually that we'll pop in the show notes, of lawyers, legal practice leads, and just established startups in this space talking about how good AI currently is at drafting contracts. I think that the gist is from these, and I don't know if you guys want to add to this, is they provide a brilliant starting point. They can get you a one-page contract that involves 12 standard clauses, and it gets you from blank page to a decent way there, but it doesn't allow very well for the nuance of your businesses and the transaction that you're looking at. But there's also, I think one of you added a link here to how good GPT-4 is at marking up contracts, because we've seen a lot as well of Microsoft Word integrations. SpellBook we mentioned earlier, for example, is basically just a GPT-4 integration sat on top of MS Word, right? And you can select text and ask it questions about a clause and various things. And that's fairly easy to do, but should you listen to the response, I suppose, is the question.
Yeah, I'll maybe let Alex P say more about the interesting article from Clausebase. But one thing I could just mention on Microsoft Word integrations is that we actually spoke to City R&D Lab this week. I don't think he'll mind me saying, but they mentioned it takes 6 months for them to create a Word integration because of the amount of permissions and how pervasive Microsoft Word is in the firm. But secondly, people just turn it off in the end because it just crashes all the time. And I've heard this a lot in law firms as well. Microsoft Word is just super clunky. Integrations are even more clunky, and large kind of payloads and API calls makes it yet more clunky. So that's not even to mention the fact that your UX UI is extremely limited using Word plugins. So I really don't think that's the future. But that said, I do definitely commend all the excellent companies like SpellBook, who are building word integrations to bring that to lawyers where they naturally work.
Yeah, I think Microsoft Word has been used by the legal industry since 1983. So I think we're ready for a change.
Maybe when Clippy gets back into Microsoft Word, we won't need the change anymore. Maybe all of us will go back to Microsoft Word and use Clippy, GPT-4 powered Clippy. I would use that.
Well, apparently, I haven't added this as the news, but Mercedes-Benz have added GPT-4 into its voice assistant. So I guess you can have very long conversations with AI on long car journeys. So those sorts of things are coming. Because I think, people have been saying it since ChatGPT came out. Google Home, Alexa, Siri, they're just crap in comparison. And how has it taken till June before someone has turned a voice assistant into a GPT-4 thing in a commercial sense? Red tape is probably the answer, but side note. Okay, so then let's move on from contract drafting. The links are there if you want to look at people who've actually, got real examples of what they've done, real examples of what it outputted, and then they've reviewed how good it is at marking up contracts. But let's talk about, say, negotiation or document review and how that works with AI. I mean, are there tools out there that allow you to end to end not rely on a lawyer, right? That will take you from start to finish? Or does everyone still need to sort of, keep their lawyer's number at hand at the moment for transactions and deals?
To me, that's a very interesting use case as well. As a consumer, I guess, and not a small business, that's where I would actually want to use an AI tool. Sometimes you get an NDA or you get some kind of contract and you read it yourself, but don't understand the nuances or many of the things. But obviously, you don't want to go and pay £5,000 to a lawyer to just review it for you unless you really have to, right? So that's where AI tools that do document review would be great, just to help understand the nuances of the contract better, understand the contract better. And interestingly enough, that's like Rafie mentioned a Clausebase article that we'll be posting a link to, and that's what they're looking at, not contract drafting, but how good GPT-4 is at reviewing contracts. And they try it on a bunch of different contract types, so NDAs, but also like licensing agreements. And I think the findings are mixed. So for some clauses of the contract, it does well, but for other clauses, it doesn't do what they were expecting it to, or what it does not make too much sense. And one of the issues there many times is that context is missing.
Yeah, I think to mention a couple of the incumbents in the contract review space. And by the way, when we talk about contracts in my previous taxonomy, we're focusing on the transactional side of law. There's often a lot of focus here because contracts are structured data, which is good for machine learning. But there is, as always, the dispute side as well. But back to contract review, LawGeex and ThoughtRiver are a couple of the well-established incumbents here. So both of them actually specialize in, well, at least in the past that I was aware of, in reviewing NDAs, which is interesting because they focused on, let's say, the easier type of contracts, and also interesting because they use, let's say, the previous approach to machine learning, which is using supervised learning models, not generative AI models. And that means that I believe, they've had to train specific models for specific contract types. And often despite saying that everything's machine learning, I'm sure there are somewhere, some rules and hard-coded aspects to it. So I think that's been the major issue with maybe old generation document review, which is that it's not scalable across all contracts, all documents, all business areas. And hopefully that's where generative AI can do better. But that said, generative AI has its own set of problems as well. Yeah.
So it sounds like it's sort of a one to watch is document review and generative AI, a hot space for improvements.
I think so. I've seen a lot of articles on this, but often the writers don't really understand the difference between generative models and discriminative models, which are two opposites, or like supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and generative learning. And as a result, they're not really using these models to the best of their ability or in the right way. So far, what we're seeing is just people plugging in, GPT-4, Anthropic into a chat and asking questions in the document, which is useful. And, we're also adding that. But where we want to go beyond that is to solve the user problem in terms of actually reviewing documents, but B, completing the workflow with a tight integration to the actual document and editor. Because you do want to ask questions, but you want to also just complete your work. You want to flag the key risky clauses in a document. You want to create, a better clause that can be signed by the counterparty. And I think that's where things get really exciting.
What happens if both sides of this are automated, Rafie?
Yeah, I look forward to seeing the day where we have two AIs automatically negotiating against each other. And I don't think we're very far away. So what do you think, Alex? How far are we from that?
Which Alex?
I think yourself, since you're actively building these things.
Yeah, it's hard to evaluate, to be honest, because a lot of the challenges there will not be technological challenges, but social change challenges, right? And one thing that is slightly scaring me about the automatic negotiation bit where both sides are lawyers is unforeseen, emergent capabilities and events. It might be that we then stop understanding the legal system altogether, right? Especially if if they're better than humans, because then who is going to use humans for the negotiations? And then we leave all the legal negotiations to an AI, and then we lose track of what's happening. But at the same time, maybe it's good. Maybe they will be better than the current system.
I feel like because you've jumped to this crazy world where we don't understand the law anymore, we should probably bring it back a little bit and just say, how could you model an AI to do negotiation, right? Who has the power in a legal negotiation, and how do you model that? I suppose we're only talking about two parties, let's say. Obviously it gets more complicated if there's three parties negotiating, and for lawyers who have this problem and are listening, you must all have experienced the pains of, a document is sent to you, it is on your party to review, you review it, you're adding comments, you have an internal meeting about it, okay, you're happy with the version that you're sending, you send it back to the parties for someone else to review. And this process can go multiple weeks between each version of the document. And sometimes someone will send back a version of a document that actually was edited before, so they've edited the wrong version. And then you have to somehow diff check and combine and create this new version of a version. And then everyone has to agree on that. And then it's like going back to doing more versions. And it's what I like to lovingly refer to as the chaotic back and forth. It's got to be one of the most painful experiences that still needs email and Microsoft Word, or at least in people's minds, that's what they think. So what we're describing is something that disrupts that, right? Where you submit the version of the document that you want, and somehow the parties involved negotiate same day, same hour, right, with AI assistants based on their priors, right, their preferences. And you then get an outcome that both parties are happy to sign. Whether or not they're both happy with it is a different matter, right? But that's the nature of negotiation.
Yeah, just to extend that, I guess, Alex D, you might have touched on game theory, and without going into any detail about it, I'm just curious even from an economic standpoint, do you think that legal negotiation is solvable technically, or do you think that it's more of a psychological problem?
I think it'll probably be a little while until we've technically solved it to a point that's socially acceptable. What I imagine happening is sort of an incremental technical solve where you have 90% of the document agreed and negotiated by machines, and the final 10% being what's the word, untenable or intractable, right? The machines can't agree, and then it goes to the lawyers to meet up and discuss about the last 4 clauses that need to be agreed, and they can just agree them there and then, rather than feeling like they need to send back versions of an entire document each time. And maybe that's what happens already with negotiation and the back and forth. And maybe for lawyers, it's clear that that's what's happening. But I think for an end user, I've been a party to these sorts of negotiations in enterprises, large enterprises, and it's horrible. No one really wants to be responsible for making the next changes or booking the next meeting. And so there's definitely, I think 90% of the, let's say, the social friction can be technically automated. And then there's 10% of the social discussion that is very human and I think important to maintain at an enterprise level. I think perhaps at small business levels, it'll be easier. Like, for example, if you have zero power, then you might just get your AI to check that there's nothing that is awful in that contract, right? No reason to not work with that vendor. And then you might just say, okay, I'm willing to sign these terms of service or this services agreement. But yeah, big enterprise to big enterprise, I think lawyers will want to show that they're worth their salaries as well. And that'll factor into the social acceptance. So I think a few things, but there's definitely a lot of time solving that can be achieved with technical solutions.
One of the challenges that I see there is that understanding the document itself, so the contract, is like just the tip of the iceberg, right? So what you really need to be able to negotiate is an understanding of the company that you are representing and of the side that you are representing, of that whole context, and that's very hard to do. I don't know, maybe it's easier than I think, but still, yeah, you don't just need to understand the document, you need to understand the business of the whole company that's behind the document as well.
I think this goes back a little bit to what I was saying about the data companies that have sort of ports, because I can imagine that you can have 2 ships in port, right, and they're both the negotiating parties. Each ship is attached to a data set of everything that they've previously agreed. And then there is a middleman or woman who understands the power dynamics and the preferences without anyone needing to spell them out. I think currently people feel like they need to spell them out in prompts, but there's going to be a point where the prompt isn't necessary. And as you say, maybe the law won't even be fully understood because they'll start creating their own systems of how to negotiate. And, I'll just add $1,200 to the contract fee, and then we're just going to remove this clause. And lawyers would be like, why the heck have you done that? And the AI is like, well, I got it signed and you got $1,200, and that's not going to happen because it's never happened before, right? Like those sorts of things could be real outcomes. But I do think the data will be a big part of setting up the framework.
Yeah, I totally agree. And this is actually a really common criticism of lawyers as well. So something that lawyers often hear internally is that they should be more commercial. Lawyers at law firms, this is. And when I first heard that, be more commercial, what does that actually mean? There's lawyer speak in a law firm to mean that they should understand the other business more or their client more so they can personalize their advice to the client. And it's exactly the same problem that you're describing here, Alex P. And I believe it's very solvable. It's just a matter of consciously building in the processes to gather the right information at the right time from those companies. And then we can use it with AI.
Isn't the case, Rafie, that in-house lawyers are actually better at contract negotiation compared to legal firms?
Yes, this is really interesting. So, they obviously care about the business a lot more, you would think. What tends to happen is that law firms, both because of the business model and generally, they prolong legal negotiations and they try and cover every single possible base because it's on their insurance and liability, and they get paid more the longer they prolong it. Whereas an in-house lawyer typically thinks more like, oh, I know what the CFO wants, I know what the CEO wants, I know what the sales team roughly needs. So we can cut this corner, this corner, and this corner. We can take this risk and this risk, and we can get the deal done in a week rather than a month. So that's kind of the difference in thinking.
So moving
what
on.
do we want the AI lawyer to do in this case? Like
Yeah.
on this spectrum, where does an AI lawyer fall under, ideally?
Well, I think you want the deep thinking of a law firm, but you want the pragmatism of an in-house lawyer. And I think you can have your cake and eat it because you can understand the law far better than the law firm because an AI can parse all that data much better. Eventually, once we understand case law and legislation, and then once we understand the business really well by ingesting their requirements and their metadata, then you can also be very pragmatic at the same time. And that's really exciting.
It feels like we're sort of talking around some of the things that we want our legal assistant to do and what we know it's going to be able to do. Is it worth, we don't usually, but is it worth just explaining a little bit about what our legal assistant is going to be able to do and when you expect us to be able to release it, Rafie? A little tease, because we haven't really said this there to the public.
Yeah, sure. I think the main kind of capabilities our legal assistant will have are the ability to ask anything about a specific document and also review and negotiate your legal document for you. So that's version 1. And in particular, what's different to the rest of the market is we haven't just plugged in GPT-4, but we have augmented it with legal knowledge and processes that lawyers do and tested it on many lawyers, as well as our own internal data sets. And what this means is our ability to review any legal document will red, yellow, and green flag every single paragraph in a document. It will explain the risk behind red flagged clauses in comments, just as a lawyer would. And finally, it will suggest a better clause for all these high-risk clauses and put that in track changes. So it's not just generating text as other assistants might do, but it's actually completing your work for you on the document, on the editor, giving you a final document that you can just send across to the other side and hopefully speeding up your work massively.
And when can I play with this?
Yeah, hopefully in a couple of months, 1 to 2 months, we're thickening the progress. And we've taken a bit longer than some companies to release an AI legal assistant, but I think that's good because we've conducted well over 50 going towards 100 user interviews just for this particular problem. And so it's going to be a very nuanced solution that actually solves the problem and doesn't just plug in a chat.
I'm honestly very excited for it. All right, enough about us, although, it's pretty cool. Crazy things from this week. Let's blast through these because I know it's already a little long one. Well, I'm happy to just go through these like I did with the news, if that's all right with you guys. So the first is that Etsy is now full of AI-generated products and spam. So coloring books, stickers, mugs, and T-shirts are being pumped out by AI-assisted hustlers. And the reason is because Etsy's policies state that it needs to be hand-altered by you. But hand-altered in terms of AI is, it's so easy. You could just apply a filter to something that the AI has generated, and technically that would pass Etsy's terms of service and guidance. So fascinating to see Etsy. I haven't actually gone on Etsy and found lots of spam stuff. I mean, I feel like Etsy has a very high variance of quality anyway. Yeah, I don't know if either of you have experienced this or if you've got any thoughts on it.
I've been burned by Etsy.
Go on.
That was so salty.
I know, I bought a table that looked so cool, but ended up being a disaster. It's very hard to get rid of as well.
So you bought a table?
I did, yeah.
Tell me about this table. Tell me about the dream when you bought this table. Because I think to buy a table on Etsy, you must really have fallen in love with this piece of furniture.
I know, it looked amazing. It looked rustic. It was a round table, the right size. It just looked good, but then it was just not working as a table. It was unstable. It didn't look good in person. It had cracks. Yeah. No, that was one of the worst home purchases I've ever done. Not going to trust Etsy again after it. Maybe I'd prefer an AI generated table over that, I think.
Are you anything like me where, despite receiving a bad product, you feel guilty about leaving a bad review?
Yes, yeah, I did not leave a bad review. Maybe I should have, but I did not.
I don't know what it says about me that I'm definitely the bad review guy. All right, on to the next one. The Grammys will also allow AI use. So I think that's really interesting. So the AI use in music is fine, but fully generated AI songs are not fine. So I think the artist needs to have had a substantial impact on the piece of music, which feels a little bit stricter than what Etsy have said, but not actually that strict. And I'm sure that will be tested in the coming years. But an interesting piece there. I didn't create an AI generated song for you guys this week. Nice to see some sad faces.
It was amazing last week.
AI commentary this year. This is fascinating. Wimbledon, which is effectively the UK Open for tennis, is going to have AI-powered commentary and coverage for online highlights of games, because obviously there's so many games at lower tiers that they still have video highlights of. But I guess they don't actually get people to do the commentary, so you just end up watching it without the voice. And it is very odd. I don't know if you guys have ever done this, but if you have like a 5.1 surround sound system, and you unplug the 0.1, I can't remember how you do this, but you can then watch all sport without commentary, and it's a totally different experience. So I can't remember if this is still possible, but I remember reading that a few years ago and thinking, if you're really into, like, you really want to feel like you're there live and you don't have a commentator, you can just unplug commentary. Or
I wonder
AI
what
generated.
the AI comments, what the AI generated comments will be based on.
Yeah.
Like, what's the input? Is the video of the event?
Yeah, I'm not sure. The article is sort of, it doesn't sound exciting, but I think the point is that, there's obviously a lot, but they're going to input, tracking data for the ball. And so, what are they going to do? Be like, that surf was 150 miles per hour, and that's one of the highlights. I don't know.
By the way, it sounds like it's based on IBM Watson, which makes me even less excited for this.
I do have a fun tennis fact for you, though, if you're ready for it.
Go for it.
David Attenborough is the reason that tennis balls are yellow. There you go.
Why? Nice.
Because he said they would show up better on camera, and everyone was like, "Oh, you're right."
What a genius! What a genius!
What a genius! We credit him for all the nature documentaries and for just being a national hero. But really, whenever I watch tennis, I'm like, "Oh, that ball is just the right color." Thank you, Sir David.
I credit him for my existence.
Interesting. Okay. I'm tempted to delve into that, but I'm worried about how deep we'll go. Finally, we've seen this before, I think, but Google has warned its own employees not to enter confidential information even into its own model. Feels a little bit weird to me. Is that because they don't... Is it... Yeah, tell me why. You guys will understand why. I'm not going to guess. Why would they do this? Surely they can protect themselves.
I don't think there's any AI reason. Yeah, it is a bit weird that they are also restricting like their own thing, but I think it's like for data protection reasons, not enter confidential data into systems with like dubious security. But why their own as well? I don't know. Maybe maybe that's saying something about the security behind, but they know something that we don't.
I think so. Yeah, it's a little dig at the InfoSec team at Google, being like, guys, we don't trust you. Internal warfare within Google. What do you reckon, Rafie? If you worked at Google and someone said to you, "Oh, by the way, don't put in, any work stuff into Bard"?
I think Google's so massive, with so many employees, that they probably treat it not like a private company, but just like a society in itself. And thereby they, have their own data standards as a society. But I also think at some level there's politics involved in this as well, because Google's slogan "Don't be evil." I think they changed it recently, but you get to a certain size and notoriety that the biggest problem is public sentiment, and so they do everything they can to protect public sentiment. And you see Google saying "Don't be evil." You see Sam Altman trying to pretend he cares about AI ethics. Sorry for the cynicism. And you heard Elon Musk in recent interviews being like, "I'm not evil," blah blah blah. So this is a big problem for people of that stature.
Google's new motto, by the way, is "Do the right thing." Yeah. Although I always preferred making the world's information more accessible. I thought that was quite a good motto. All right, that about wraps it up, unless either of you had any other things you wanted to add.
Just if you're on YouTube, apologies for my pathetic background image this time around. I've been trying to get Midjourney to work, but it's the onboarding's a bit of a slog, if anyone's tried it.
It is hands down your worst background. I honestly thought that was a Genie rebrand in the background, Rafie. I thought we were going to be called LawGeex from now on.
That would be shocking.
I have a stable diffusion generated golden retriever lying on a rock in a stream. It just makes me happy. I wish this dog existed. It's too fluffy. It's like AI fluff is off the scale of dog fluff, but it also looks quite realistic. I'm into it.
I have a DALL-E generated steampunk AI lawyer in court.
Sorry, a what? AI lawyer in court? I'm just trying to understand the horrific thing that you have behind you and what you did to prompt it.
I don't know. It's a steampunk AI lawyer.
Ping pong.
No, steampunk. Sorry, my Greek accent is.
Steampunk.
Yeah.
That does not look steampunk.
It does not indeed. Yeah.
That looks like impressionist horror. Well, steampunk can be a bit horror, can't it? Mad Max and stuff is steampunk, and that's a little bit horrific. Anywho, so yeah, you can see these images on YouTube, and we don't know when we're going to do our next season. We will definitely do the next season because I think we've all really enjoyed this. So thank you all. Hopefully you've really enjoyed listening to these episodes. This is the last of the series, and we will be back. Yeah, we may put more effort into our YouTube as well. So do please plonk yourselves there. And Rafie is very keen for us to pop a little poll on LinkedIn or a little post on LinkedIn. So pop to our LinkedIn and just ask us or tell us, sorry, what you would like us to talk about in the next season. Anything at all, whatever's on your mind. We have not decided what that's going to look like yet. So whatever idea you have, whatever podcast niche isn't being filled for you in the world of using AI or AI generally, let us know. We'd love to hear it. But yeah, thank you guys for listening.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Rafie.